What's the fantasy football fallout of Super Bowl 58 between the 49ers and Chiefs? It's time to break down Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, and the rest as we begin a week and another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. This is the last Reaction Monday we'll have for the season here until 2024 kicks off. And we know who's going to be in that first game of the year. It's going to be the Chiefs. Congratulations to them. They repeat as Super Bowl champions, the first repeat in a long time since the Patriots did it. So they hold off the 49ers 25-20. In a thriller here. We'll break down the performances there, what they mean for the future on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football, starting with the quarterbacks, getting Christian McCaffrey and Travis Kelce, and then looking at some other issues facing both teams after this great game from last night. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not to this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Hey, Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
This is Locked On Fantasy Football, your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in the league year-round. During the playoffs, through the Super Bowl, we've got you covered, and we'll get you covered all off-season long as well. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Prize Picks. Hopefully you got in on Prize Picks for the Super Bowl. Easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL, for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, Michelle, let's dive right into it. Patrick Mahomes, look, he didn't have many of these performances in the regular season because he didn't finish as the QB that we wanted in fantasy. We took him high. He didn't finish anywhere near there. But what a performance here. Look, I know he had the one interception, but in the end, the numbers are all that counts, and he ends up with 333 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and he also led the Chiefs with 66 rushing yards in this game. It was a terrific performance when the Chiefs needed most, all the way through the fifth quarter, end of overtime.
Yeah, it is wild, though. So, again, he needed the overtime to throw that second touchdown. It's just like one passing touchdown, one passing. Every game, it's been one passing touchdown for Mahomes, and we're not used to that, right? Especially during the fantasy season. We need a lot more from him than one passing touchdown. The yardage was great from him, and we know once it hits the Super Bowl or even just the playoffs, he brings out his legs and he uses them more, and he's not worried about, getting hurt because it's the end of the year. I wish he would do that all season long, but I also get protecting your body and making it out throughout the whole season. So he did exactly what we expected with his legs with the 66 yards. Great to see how many passing yards he had as well. But for him, in terms of drafting him super early with the other guys like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, like he's going to need to throw more than the one passing touchdown. Like we need those passing touchdown numbers to increase to what they used to be.
Yeah, and the other thing is we need him to go throw for some ridiculous yardage too. We want him to go up to like 300 yards per game. That used to be automatic, right? He was on his way to 5,000, and we were happy about that. But then he threw some interceptions, which cut into that. He didn't quite have that prolific yardage season. And then the TDs weren't there. He had fewer than 30. So, look, for him to be successful, because, as you mentioned, he doesn't run a lot in the regular season, or not to this dynamic level. Like you'll maybe get 20 yards. That'll be a good kind of bonus to what you get. But with him, you really have to get him to get to 300 and put up those two scores. And if you can get that, then you're in business. But he's just so dependent a little bit on the volume. And look, the volume wasn't as we expected, as the Chiefs' defense was too good, right? I think they'll take a few hits there, and maybe their defense will come a little bit back to the pack. You'll have to throw a little bit more. I think the league and the conference in general will be more competitive with his schedule. I mean, look at the schedule. You have C.J. Stroud and Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow all coming into Kansas City, and then there's some other really good potential high-scoring matchups. So we need him to throw. We need the defense to not be as dominant, we don't want the running game to be this good either for Patrick Mahomes' sake. So I think I would target him. Let's just say this. I'm not going to go back and say he's right up there as a QB1 all of a sudden with Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, right? I'm not going back up there. But I would say if you're looking at top 8, I think that's a comfortable spot to go after Patrick Mahomes next year. I know there's a lot of quarterbacks coming. We'll talk about that with Brock Purdy, but I don't see him falling outside of the top 12 again in terms of average scoring.
No, but he also won't be drafted that late, like,
Yeah.
right? If you have him
Yeah.
ranked around 8, which I'll have him definitely inside my top 8 once I have my rankings out,
Yeah.
but he's still going to go as the quarterback 2 or 3, worst 4. So you're still going to have to pay up 3rd round pick for him, 4th round at the latest. And I probably will stay away from that unless they sign someone huge in free agency or one after one of these great rookie wide receivers. Maybe that would change my mind. Moving on to Purdy, though. So I just feel bad in general for this 49ers team. I'm sad today. You know, I'm a 49ers fan. I have zero desire to talk about the Super Bowl because it crushed my soul. I thought Purdy overall played a really solid game for being so young, this being his first time in the Super Bowl. He didn't make any mistakes. He had some good passes in there. If they had a right tackle that wasn't the worst player in the entire world, they win this game pretty easily. So I don't know. I don't think you could take too much from this from Brock Purdy. Tough defense. I thought he did fine. Brandon Ayuk didn't step up enough. You know, just like there wasn't really anything there, this offense overall, besides Christian McCaffrey. But in terms of fantasy value, I do think maybe this keeps Brock Purdy's draft cost down because he didn't like go off in the playoffs. And then if his draft cost is down 9th, 10th round, 11th round, I'm cool again to draft him, right? It was earlier before the playoffs started, I was getting worried that his draft cost is going to be too high for what he offers in terms of ceiling for fantasy, but he's a pretty safe play from week to week.
Yeah, he's another quarterback that you're not going to get much from the legs. I know he ran a little bit more in the playoffs for sure, and he had a big game there in the round against the Lions for the championship game. So that's not going to happen again with Brock Purdy. He's going to execute. And he also had a ridiculous touchdown rate. It was 7% plus here. That doesn't happen. He led the league. So 7% of his throws resulted there in touchdowns. So that's a really high rate. I mean, when you lead the league in that, and he had a lot of big yardage plays, right? I mean, he led the league in yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, well over 9. So again, we'll see how they adjust, and they're going to have to sort out some things at wide receiver as well. So that's in the mix. And you mentioned the right tackle, Colton McKivitz. They're going to have to make some offensive line upgrades here. This is the weakness that they have for the most part. I mean, Trent Williams is good, but they've got some free agent issues at the other spots. They don't really have great interior play either. So I think they're really, with their 11 draft picks that they have, they're going to have to really focus on getting better protection for Purdy. I think these guys are okay for the running game because they're athletic and they can move a little bit, but man, they were not good, especially that play near the end of the game where they kind of just broke down and there was no chance for Brock Purdy to throw anything. So this has been kind of a bugaboo for the 49ers all year long. And now, look, I think their game plan was fine. That's how they had to win the game. I mean, they were not going to win passing downfield on this Chiefs defense or having Purdy hold the ball a lot. They had to use McCaffrey. This is what we thought, right? McCaffrey was going to have a big game. That's exactly what happened. I think the fact that the 49ers stayed in it with not much from Ayuk, Debo, and Kittle was on Purdy. He made some plays to Juwan Jennings. We know Juwan Jennings made a play as well that you called a touchdown wide receiver option pass that McCaffrey caught. So he came through that way, Juwan Jennings, but he also was a key receiver. You had Chris Conley and Ray McLeod show up for some big plays that they needed. So look, Purdy did the best he could. With all those guys covered, I think he played well. But you're right. I think his cost is still going to be reasonable because keep in mind, you got Joe Burrow coming back from injury, Kirk Cousins coming back from injury, Aaron Rodgers, Anthony Richardson is probably going to be a popular pick as a dual threat. I don't know what you're going to get from Caleb Williams. So, yeah, I mean, I think you just have to maybe recalibrate what you think a QB1 is, right? Maybe there's more guys who can put up 20-plus points, whatever, if you have a 4-point passing touchdown. So I think Purdy, however, is going to be a good value in relation to those guys. And we could go back to the days where, look, unless you're playing 2 quarterback leagues, there's not much difference between quarterback 9 on the board and quarterback 15 on the board.
Yeah, and I think once we get to that part of the draft, like if you want to punt on the position and wait for your quarterback, there's going to be so many options. I think this will be a very heavy year to just wait on your quarterback because you just named a handful of them right there. They're all going to be available later in that draft. I mean, there's going to be well more than 12 guys that I feel comfortable going in as my starting quarterback for fantasy. And that's most people's leagues, right? You have a 12, that's a pretty standard league, 12, 10 people in your league. So like everyone's going to have a quarterback that you feel pretty good about. So that means you don't have to take these early guys.
Yeah, and this might be more of an indication if there's this much value at a position and we have to maybe adjust as fantasy football managers and players, maybe, hey, we got to go more super flex in 2 quarterback leagues. Make
Yeah.
this position as important as it is in the NFL, right? This is everything in the NFL. It's what wins championships. Let's do that as well. And look, that way you can have Mahomes and Purdy on your team here in 2024. Wouldn't that be fun? So going back and forth on those guys. So we'll look at the other stars in the game, the guys that everyone was watching carefully, Christian McCaffrey and Travis Kelce, and what's going on with them after they both had big Super Bowls. Before we do that, we got to hear a little bit more from our sponsor, Prize Picks. All right. If you played Prize Picks during the Super Bowl, you had a lot of fun. You knew exactly what we talk about when we said it's the most fun you can have playing fantasy sports because it's daily made easy for you. And really, you go 2 to 6 players, and if they go more or less than their stat projections that are available on Prize Picks, that's it. Then you get paid off, and there's of course a multiplier as you go along. The more players you put in that beyond 2, the better chances you have of winning big. And really, it's very convenient to play. There's so many options, player stat types that you can select. You can look at your winnings pretty easily there, and really, it's fun. And you can watch the winnings pile up rather quickly here. It is great because you have all kinds of cool features here, including the reboot policy. If you lose a player or someone in the game, they're going to get you there out of the mix. And then quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, enormous selection of players and stat types. These are all what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So check it out now. It's a good time to get in. I know the Super Bowl's ended, but there's plenty of other sports. Get in on the NBA. We got the All-Star game and all kinds of good stuff coming up there. But you can still use a promo code here. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL for first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL with the promo code LockedOnNFL for first deposit match. Prize Picks up to $100. All right, Michelle, let's dive right into Christian McCaffrey's game. And this was a very special game. This was the 80-80 game. That's what I'll remember it as. He gets 30 touches here, 80 receiving, 80 rushing, gets a touchdown on that play that we saw from Juwan Jennings. And he has 30 touches and really was involved from wire to wire in this game plan. Now, what I'm concerned about, though, Michelle, he gets the ball a lot. He played 3 extra games. He got high volume in that. He's getting a little older, 27. What do we do here with him going forward? Do we want to keep trusting him based on what we saw in the regular season and the playoffs? But do we have to start to fade him here? I mean, he's going to turn 28 in June. So I don't know. It might be getting close to that time for Christian McCaffrey.
It might be getting close, but I still think he has one more huge year in him.
Yeah.
Like he's the 101 to me, no questions asked. I don't care about any other wide receiver. You can find wide receivers later. It's so hard to find a Christian McCaffrey. Like he's just such a difference maker in your fantasy leagues. He's the 101 until he proves me otherwise. Any running back could get hurt, right? So you are a little bit worried about the touches on his body, his aging, but he proved this year that his body could hold up with these touches. Now he has this whole off season to prep his body again. Maybe we don't see as many carries on him. Maybe they don't have as many blowouts, right? We'll see what their defense will look like next year, who they retain, who they lose, who maybe they add some players, whatever, right? And then also maybe in Purdy's 3rd year now, they can trust him to throw the ball a little bit more too, because Purdy had very, very few pass attempts this year for starting 16 games this year. So we could see McCaffrey's volume go down a little bit in the carries, but that could mean if they're going to pass more, then maybe McCaffrey just gets more receptions next year too, which, I mean, that all evens out. Obviously, touchdowns are kind of fluky, but CMC in this offense is going to keep scoring touchdowns. Like, I'm not too worried about that. He's the 101 hands down to me for 2024.
Yeah, I think you have to think that way because all of a sudden, Michelle, all those durability issues he had in Carolina. Funny how going to a good team that schemes their whole running game and their passing game around your specific talents, what that does to get a guy motivated to play and healthy each week. And this guy's a tremendous athlete. He keeps himself in terrific shape. And the one thing, Michelle, is how many times do we see him run untouched in a lot of cases when he's going to the end zone? So they're keeping him rather clean. I know he took some vicious hits yesterday, that game. The Chiefs were swarming and all that. But look, you're right. Running back can hurt anyone, right? We saw that with Austin Eckler. We saw it with Nick Chubb at the biggest level. Jonathan Taylor, just been the list. So if this player's elite, then go after him. Just be smart and go get Elijah Mitchell or see how that plays out between him and Jordan Mason to make sure you have the plug and play guy behind McCaffrey. If you're doing that, then you're okay. You might not get the receiving and scoring level if you plug and play somebody, but then you protect McCaffrey in that investment. So, yeah, I think he might have 2 big seasons left until he gets to the year 30. I think he's creeping and might already be there in Hall of Fame territory here because of just his enormous production, right? I mean, receiving, rushing, he's a little bit of Marshall Faulk, a little bit of Terrell Davis, having excelled in the same type of system here under a Shanahan. So there's all kinds of good stuff. So I'm going to trust him for one more year. I'm absolutely on board with that. And yeah, he's going to be 101 because look, wide receivers not sold, right? Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb. You can't necessarily think all those guys are going to repeat what they did. So I love that for sure. Now, Travis Kelce is an interesting case. Now, before the playoffs started, I said, well, maybe he's slowing down. He's not getting the snaps that we're looking at. Then he just explodes throughout the playoffs. 4 playoff games for him. He has big ones. He didn't score the Super Bowl. That was the only knock. I mean, he started out slow, but he still had 9 catches for 93 yards. I love that play that set up the game-winning touchdown where they threw short and he's just carrying the entire 49ers defense. He was fired up, emotional. I don't know what he was doing, pushing Andy Reid around, but he didn't even hesitate. He said he was back to run it back. Based on what we've seen, do we keep trusting him as a tight end 1 and maybe the top tight end on the board?
He's the safest tight end, and I don't want to take him as a first rounder this next year. But if he's still sitting there in the second round, I mean, do a mock draft right now for 2024. There's not a lot of guys that you feel great about, even once you already get to the second round. Like, everyone has like inconsistencies, or there's something there where you're a little bit nervous to take them. At that point, if I'm not, overpassing some great wide receiver or running back in the first round, and Travis Kelce sitting there in the second, I think he's completely fine. He's not going to, like, I think that little era of time there, that span of a few weeks, I just think it was just a down period for him, and every player is going to go through that. And we kind of freaked out a little bit too much. Of course, he is getting older. He's not going to have as high of upside on a week-to-week basis, but he's still so incredibly safe. He just didn't score touchdowns this year. That was really his big thing. He only had 5 touchdowns in the regular season, but we know that can change very quickly next year. And I think him getting help, like, I think them adding pieces is only good for Kelce. Like, that will just help him, give him the ability to be open more often when defenses actually have to worry about someone else other than just Kelce.
Maybe it also took him a little time to adjust to his attention, right? He's not used to getting that type of attention and trying to balance that off with things that are happening off the field and what he's doing on the field, right? And maybe there was a little bit of a lull there where he's trying to find himself or something to that degree. But I think he found himself completely in the playoffs where he was his old self. He was having fun. We knew that he was staying up all night partying with we know who he was with. So he was happy. He was energetic. He even played off a little confrontation we had with Andy Reid. So there's a lot of stuff I liked about the body language of Travis Kelce, that he's ready. He's ready to, he was just fiery and ready to go. And look, when he had that, I was like, oh no, are they going to do something and bench him? And is Reid going to be mad? Then no, instead they just unleash him there for the rest of the game and he dominates. So yeah, I mean, there's no way they want to take him out of what he's capable of doing here. I mean, he's so critical for Patrick Mahomes. He's so critical for the entire offense, where I think that role doesn't change. Keep in mind, Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates, Jason Witten, These guys played a long time. And he's not, I think he's more like one of those guys than Rob Gronkowski. He would have retired at this point after 11 seasons. So could he go 14, 15, 16 seasons? We'll see. But the thing we want to know for 2024, I think we're good. Like, I think we're good for him. I would take him as the tight end one for sure. I just don't find anyone else who'd be safe, reliable in this offense. I know what I'm going to get from him. I don't know exactly what I'm going to get from everyone else. Kelce has been the core of my 2 championship teams the last 2 years. Look, that it's why, because you get him in the first round and you're good to go. So I really like that. And again, I'm going to buy into him all the way as a tight end one. So McCaffrey, Kelce, keep it up.
Yeah, they're still at the top of their position, even as they age. We call them old men, even though McCaffrey's a good 4 years younger than me, and Kelsey's only like a year or two older than me. But yeah, they are aging in terms of NFL years at their position, but they still have at least one more good year in them both. We're going to get into the other positional players for the 49ers and the Chiefs, where we think they'll be going with their current wide receivers and who they may add or trade away this offseason. But first, let's hear from our sponsor, DoorDash. DoorDash went all out for game day, and DoorDash stuff from all of the Super Bowl ads to one lucky winner. Cars, snacks, even tax software. And somehow they pulled it off. I'm a little bummed I didn't win, but gotta hand it to them. It was one heck of a delivery. DoorDash is the all-in-one app for your everyday needs, from restaurants and groceries to flowers and gifts. So next time you're running low on dinner ideas, pet supplies, or just time, you can get so much more than you realize delivered. Football season may be over, but we're in the thick of basketball games, the school year, and let's face it, winter. I can think of a million reasons to order daily from DoorDash. Hop on the DoorDash app and make your day a little easier. All right, Vinny, let's talk about these 49ers wide receivers. Both are ready to get a pretty big payday in 2024. We have Ayuk on his 5th-year option. And then we have Debo. I mean, he's going to have a $28 million cap hit next year. But the thing is, his dead cap is $26 million. So it's not like they can really move on from him until 2025. So I think Debo stays. And I do think he's the more important of the two, right?
Yeah.
Brandon Ayuk, on the other hand, he's going to want this contract extension. I don't know if they're going to give it to him. We saw the whole thing with Debo Samuel play out. He threatened to, he asked for a trade. He threatened to sit out. He finally got an extension done. But the 49ers are pretty stingy and they're not going to give in. So I don't know if they sign Ayuk to that contract extension he wants this time. I don't know if Ayuk will request a trade. It could be an ugly offseason for Ayuk. What do you envision for him this offseason?
Yeah, a couple of things you have to also keep in mind is that they got to pay Brock Purdy in 2025, and they got to figure out exactly how they're going to do that. And maybe Juwan Jennings gave them something to think about, right? The way he played in the Super Bowl. And the problem with him is he hasn't always been consistent or staying healthy. And they did also draft Ronnie Bell, who had a little bit of a flash when he got an opportunity, not things special, but again, a guy that they did have on their roster that produced a little bit when he was getting a chance. So they have to consider that, right? Can you really tie up not only money in Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel, but also George Kittle? You can't have that much money on your offensive weapons. We learned that from the Chiefs, right? I mean, they could basically keep Travis Kelce, but not him and Tyreek Hill, and really afford that at that position. So I would love to see Brandon Ayuk actually in a Chiefs uniform streaking downfield. We'll see if they can help each other in that situation. But yeah, Ayuk is just tough. I think they might get a deal done, but I think they're going to have to restructure some of these other contracts to make it happen, and maybe do a little bit of a short-term deal with Ayuk if you want to keep this band together, right, for Brock Purdy for at least one more year. So there's that to consider here offensively as well. So yeah, I think they might be in the market to go after a receiver. They've tried some other guys that, again, haven't panned out in later rounds. I mean, Jennings has probably been the best of those bunch as a 7th rounder from 2020. So when you look overall, yeah, I mean, I want this team to be intact for Brock Purdy's sake, but for the longer term, maybe they have to move one of these guys. So it'll be very interesting to see. I think they'll get plenty of offers, especially for Ayuk, who's seemingly on the block here. So a lot of things to monitor there, but I think the 49ers might need to think about drafting some wide receiver help on top of that offensive line help with those 11 picks. So what do you think? I mean, I think you said you want Samuel over Ayuk, but could you see it to go the other way around?
Well, with the money that Devo's owed, I can't. But also, I think Devo's way more important to this offense
Yeah,
than how it runs. Ayuk is a really good wide receiver, but I also think even in his situation, maybe he would like to be somewhere where he can be the alpha and
yeah,
get more targets on a consistent
I
basis.
can see that.
And the 49ers could get a first round pick for Ayuk, like a later
Yeah,
first
I think
round
so.
pick, if for sure. So I think at this point, if they don't plan to extend him, right? If they don't plan to do that, you only have one more year left at him. They could franchise tag him the next year, but if you don't plan to extend him, maybe this is the time. You trade for a first round pick, maybe take a wide receiver in the first round and keep trying to stay cheaper, since you will have to pay Brock Purdy soon. You're already playing Debo. You're paying George Kittle a lot of money as well. Also, George Kittle,
Yeah,
like, what do we do with him for fantasy next year? Because I he's always been my least favorite fantasy tight end. I will never draft him because he always goes super high. He's always very expensive for a tight end, and he's so incredibly inconsistent because the games that he's bad, it's not just bad. They lose you weeks game. He's
yeah.
scoring like 1 point in your lineup because he'll completely disappear or he goes off. But as many games as he wins you, he loses you as well. And I don't like that. I can't deal with that type of up and down roller coaster of a season. And it's like goes for long spans of time, right? He'll have like a few games in a row that are amazing, but then also like a 5 games in a row where he does nothing for you. It's too much of a headache. So I'm going to continue to stay away from him for fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, look at the year before. I mean, he was very touchdown dependent. And this year he was very yardage dependent, right? He has to have the big plays too. He's a very unusual tight end. I mean, he's a good reality tight end because he's excellent at blocking, and then he's ferocious, like stretching the field and can run past people and do that. But you're right, the consistency is there, and sometimes the usage is not consistent either, right? I mean, there's some games where they say, okay, it's a George Kittle game. We're going to work the middle of the field. Some games like, okay, you're blocking and dominating, good for you. That's your role this game. We don't need you as much downfield. So boom or bust. I think that's a good way to put George Kittle. And it's very weird because tight end is usually a position you're looking for consistency, right? You're looking for 6 to 7 targets, 5 to 6 catches, something like that, right? And you want 60 yards. I think you would take 60 yards and not a touchdown for a few games versus getting one game every 5 weeks that he goes for 123 and 2, and then you have a lot of duds. So yeah, I'm with you on George Kittle. I love George Kittle, the reality player, but yeah, you got to disassociate. And plus, there's a lot of guys we've talked about them already: Mark Andrews and Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. There's a lot of appealing guys that could be more consistent and also give you that big game appeal. Now, let's go to the Chiefs. Looking at them, their question now. Their big question is finding that wide receiver too. Now, Marcus Valdez-Scantling, as we've mentioned, even though he caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl, they can cut him. They can get 12 million in relief. They need that relief, right? If they're going to try to look at Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed, then Mecole Hardman's a free agent. Richie James is a free agent. I would suspect all those guys are gone. They could cut Sky Moore as well. Kadarius Toney, I don't think there's any way he's back on this team. So there's a wide open spot for this wide receiver on the outside, right? Rashee Rice is the big slot. Kelce is the tight end. Now, whoever that wide receiver is, whether he's a rookie or a veteran, how ready are you to draft that guy? Because I think I am if they clear out a lot of these guys behind Kelce and Rice.
Yeah, it all depends on who they bring in. I do think they need to bring in a big name, whether that be in the draft, they use an early draft pick on a wide receiver, or they sign one of these top free agents, whether it be Pittman or I
Yeah.
can't see Mike Evans signing, but maybe that would be sick, right? Or T. Higgins, like maybe they trade for Brandon Ayuk or something like that. I would be on, yeah, whoever they were to add, I would be very, very high on. With Rashee Rice, I do think the playoffs kind of made me cool on him.
Yeah.
It's not like he was a big part of their offense, but so many such short targets. He's going to, if they keep using him in that way with the just incredibly low average depth of target, he's going to be way too touchdown dependent for me. And I'll say I'm doing a mock draft right now for 2024 with some other fantasy analysts around the industry. Rashee Rice went in the early third round.
Oof.
If that's his draft price, I am so far off of that. It's not to say he's not a talent. I love Rashee Rice. I'm not paying a third round pick unless you have faith that they're going to utilize him in a different way next year. And I don't think we can really say that for sure, especially in February when we've seen the way they've used him throughout the whole playoffs.
Yeah, and if Kelce gets a bump up and scores, and this third receiver is legitimate, and maybe it's Marquise Brown, that's who I keep going for because the Chiefs have been interested in him before because he's a big play threat. He's on the outside. He'd be great. He's not a good number one, but playing off Kelce and Rice, I think would be good, or somebody in the draft, especially if they use a first round pick. So that's the thing is these guys could come to production. Keep in mind, Rashee Rice is basically in the Juju Smith-Schuster role, right? What upside did he have last year? Not that much. He finished as a wide receiver 3 in a lot of formats, but that's it. He's in the Juju role. I think they had to throw to him a lot more on the inside because Kelce was slowing down a little bit and he didn't have the outside receiver. So something to look at there. But yeah, I'm very intrigued how they address that outside position here at Upgrade. And then finally, let's look at Isaiah Pacheco. I'm wondering what they're going to do in the backfield because Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jerick McKinnon are free agents. So do you think, based on Pacheco actually being a pretty good receiver, I think he was underrated in that role this year, had a couple key catches in the Super Bowl. Do you think he's going to be treated as a workhorse, or do you think Andy Reid, even though workhorse has been his history, and he goes and finds a complimentary back, or maybe somebody he can get on the field more in receiving situations?
I think Pacheco goes in the next year as a clear lead back on this team. He'll get a lot of volume, and that's what he's going to be, a volume player. But we also know that the Chiefs are very inconsistent with the way they run the ball. Like some games they really ignore the run. Some games they go heavier. Pacheco, his efficiency during the playoffs was pretty horrible. But he looks good, which is weird. And then you see his ending numbers. You're like, wow, I guess that wasn't very good performance. He looks fine out there. I don't know. I'm like Pacheco's the type of guy that doesn't have the upside for me. He doesn't excite me enough for fantasy. He's very, very, very touchdown dependent. But if they do start to utilize him more as a pass catcher, which I think, like you said, he can handle that role, then he becomes more enticing, right? Because then you're not just so dependent on volume as with his carries. You don't need 20 carries if you're going to get 5 targets a game or somewhere around there. Then I might become more interested. But yeah, Pacheco's just one of those type of fantasy players I'm just not all that excited about.
Yeah, keep him as an RB2. I think he's solid that way. I just don't see his role expanding too much. I think they'll try to replace McKinnon. Edwards-Helaire has been really disappointment because they drafted him because he was such a good receiver at LSU, and he never really panned out that way. So I think they'll find a guy that can get involved in the passing game, cut into that. And if that's happening, even though Pacheco's decent in that area, it means less touches, right? And he's more dependent on the rushing yards and touchdowns. So it's really hard to get some. So I would say just play him as an RB2 and go in that direction. Now, there's your breakdown of the Chiefs here and the 49ers as well from Super Bowl 58. So a lot of good stuff to unpack there. Now we flip the page for the offseason. So stick with us all offseason long. We'll have a lot of good stuff here looking forward and getting you ready. We got the free agency period and the draft and all that good stuff. So stick with us here on Locked On Fantasy Football, and we got you covered. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.